Welcome to the 3x5 news, views, and reviews scribbled on index cards. We get in and get out fast, so keep up. If you get the impression I'm getting very tired of the winter and would like the motorcycle season to begin, you would be correct. Today, in the wake of the Oval Office meeting heard around the world, it would be presumptuous of me to stick my 2 cents in light of all the amazing commentary on it. I've watched and read hours. I admit that when Trump put his hand on his arm, I kind of wished Zelensky would have swatted it away, or at least given his hand the glare. That can be very effective. I've had it done to me. But if Trump is all scorched earth, Zelensky's priority is not to burn bridges. Before I move on to some of the wider issues, I have two brief observations. First, Zelensky's, as well as that of most analysts and historians, concern, of course, is that Putin will eventually break a treaty with Ukraine, as it has innumerable times. What is implicit in the U.S. stance is that Russia would never break a treaty that the U.S., or more to the point, Trump signed. The U.S. can't say this because it would insult Russia and undermine chances for a treaty. But do we really need to be reminded that Russia has broken treaties with the U.S. as well? Most recently, 2 years ago, when Putin withdrew from what is called New START. That was the last treaty that limited how many weapons via inspections could be included in U.S. and Russian nuclear weapons arsenals. Aside to Trump, if you are really such good friends with Putin, get him to sign a new nuclear treaty. Oh, that's right. You trust him too much to think he will build up the arsenal or attack us. But Putin would just break it or withdraw anyway. Second, in the Republican tradition of leaving a mess to clean up, the next president, very likely Democratic if there is a fair election, could very well be handed a hot war in Europe to clean up. Finally, a large portion of Trump voters don't follow the news. If they did, they might not have voted for him. But what just happened is so big, it will probably filter through to most everybody. I'm sorry, I just can't believe that any but the MAGA faithful are on board with the U.S. siding with Russia against freedom fighters. You might not see an immediate crash in Trump's polls, but come 2026, Republican congresspersons could feel pressured to split from Trump on this lest they lose their seats. But that may be one of the main reasons Trump is trying to steamroll Zelensky. Allow me to quote longtime New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman. Dating back to when he supported George W. Bush's decision to invade Iraq, he was a leftist nemesis. Today, he is an opponent of Trump with whom we join hands. The finer points of policy be damned. Quote, at the geoeconomic level, I think Trump's Ukraine strategy is all about the midterm election. Trump thinks, if I can actually end this war and lift sanctions on Russia, Russian oil will swamp the global market. It'll drive down the price of gasoline at the pump, and I will win the midterms. Close quote. Last week, from Ukraine, the great historian of Eastern Europe, Timothy Snyder, wrote, I have the strange feeling this week in Kiev that Ukrainians are living freer lives now than Americans. At a bookstore where I was talking to a Ukrainian philosopher about freedom, a young woman put her hand on my arm and said, sorry about the U.S., end quote. As a patriotic American, that is absolutely mortifying. Russia and the U.S., a match made in hell to rival soulless entities from science fiction such as the Galactic Empire from Isaac Asimov's Foundation, or from other such books and films, the Galactic Union, the Federation, Star Trek's The Dominion. Moving on to the heart of our broadcast, I feel compelled to ask whatever happened to the halcyon days when you could call Russia-friendly Americans Reds and the C word. No, not the sickening one applied to women, but the colloquialism for communist. It appears that YouTube does not like it when I use that word anywhere in the proximity of Trump's name, so C word it must be. People under the age of 40 might be only dimly acquainted with that term, but for those over, it will resonate deeply. It was once the worst thing you could call someone. Boomers support Trump will have to contort themselves or resort to, in the words of Steely Dan, pretzel logic to explain why they and their fearless leader, catch the Boris Badenov reference, are not the C word. Of course, the Cold War days when that word was bandied about were terrible times. It was used to tar many on the left and destroy careers. It was especially objectionable if, like me, you believed détente between the United States and the Soviet Union should be a goal. Being enemies with a nuclear-armed country was never a good idea. Many Americans seem to act on the assumption that Russia left communism behind when the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, and Russia made an about-face to capitalism. The truth, though, is what historian Francis Fukuyama recently called Putin's Russia, quote, the latest incarnation of the former Soviet Union, unquote. Once Putin came to power in 2000, he has basically sought to be Stalin-like. Stalin was the worst communist ever when it comes to repression, expansionism, and cult of personality, not to mention executions. Lots and lots and lots of them. Putin is not quite as iron-fisty as Stalin with his Holodomor in Ukraine and the Great Terror in Russia itself, but he's not that far off. Returning to Trump, recently the Kiev Post, addressing something else beside the war, revisited his history with Russia. Unproven allegations that he was recruited as a Russian asset in the 80s aside, it reported that the February 18th meeting in Saudi Arabia between Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and American negotiators, Russian oligarch Dmitry Rybolovlov, though not sitting at the table, was present at the talks. It was Rybolovlov who extended a helping hand to Trump in 2008 when the latter was in serious debt by paying $95 million for one of Trump's properties that was valued at less than half that. Trump's business dealings with Russia have kind of got lost in the shuffle among all his other outrages, but they also include his attempt to build luxury hotels in Moscow and his son Donald Jr.'s 2008 claim that Russians made up a disproportionate cross-section of the family's assets. He actually said that. The word disproportionate suggests the family had some qualms, long since quieted, I'm sure, about that. The list is much longer, but let us end with that chestnut from the admittedly questionable Steele dossier. I am referring to the never corroborated golden shower videotape of Trump and a prostitute in a Moscow hotel. A few years ago, Kompromat, Russian for material that can be used for blackmail, it might have tanked Trump's political fortune. Today, however, if found to be true, it would be yet more cause for his male supporters to celebrate Trump for living out a porn fantasy. Hashtag can't win for losing. In my last video, I advanced the idea that the term Putinista is perfect for the likes of Trump, as well as his slavish followers of political fashion, such as Vance, Hegseth, Musk, et al., slavish followers of political fashion. But this week, as the New Yorker's Susan Glasser wrote, edited slightly, quote, Trump's embrace of America's adversary and rejection of its ally has been swift and complete, end quote. In light of that, let's take the gloves off and just call them all the C word. Unless we wear that out, we can fall back on calling them Putinistas. Returning to Thomas Friedman, the other day he perfectly encapsulated an idea that I've had for years about Republican congresspeople and officials who bow down before Trump and his Cro-Magnons. Classless, I know, but sometimes I can't resist. Cro-Magnons. You can use that. Putting it into words better than I ever could, he said, quote, I look at these people and I say to myself, you people clearly do not have mirrors, wives, or kids, because if I did what you did, such craven sycophancy, I wouldn't be able to look in the mirror. And if I did what you did, I would come home and my mattress and my golf clubs would be spilling down the driveway. My wife would have thrown them out of the house and golf balls would be spinning down the driveway. My two daughters would not be talking to me. Bada boom.